Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. James DePelisi here. I'm the director and chairman of the Broward County Crime Commission. It's my proud pleasure as we delve into our last panel of the day, the troubles with the troubled teen industry, to be with us right now via satellite, as they used to say. Ken Rosen is in Italy via Zoom. And essentially, we're happy to have him. He was not able to be with us live on today's date, had to pre-record it. Ken is an expert in this scenario because he's an accomplished author. He's put together a very well acclaimed book by the name of Troubled, and you can go to Amazon.com to learn more about that. It's entitled Troubled, the Failed Promise of America's Behavioral Treatment Programs. But Ken is also able to discuss these things and see things from a different lens as well, due to the fact that he has also been a part of being in these programs. And you couldn't ask for anything more in terms of what the Crime Commission is looking to get from this panel in terms of what we want to convey to the public of what they may learn about this industry, what they can do to prevent and preempt some of the things that have been cited in this industry. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Ken Rosen to our program and our panel today. Good afternoon to you, Ken. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jim. Thanks for inviting me and for facilitating my virtual being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. Before we get started, is there anything that you want to segue about your background a little bit other than what I covered?
I undertook the reporting of Troubled over the course of 4 years, interviewed more than 100 former clients from troubled teen programs across the country, and used those stories picked four to then track a trajectory through the programs that is most often seen with teens submitted to this sort of congregate care behavior modification treatment. And this would be the first time that someone has ventured to track the growth and outcome of these programs 10 years down the line after many of them have graduated the programs.
Great. So was this your first book that you had written? Have you written other journals and other books in the past?
I was a staff reporter at the New York Times for 6 years, but I have only authored a very small book last year about my war correspondence in Syria and Iraq.
Great. So what compelled you to write this book? If you want to tell a little bit about your background, because you were actually involved in the industry from the standpoint that by proxy your parents allowed you to go to these scenarios, and I think that the vernacular that they use is by proxy kids are kidnapped, and we'll get to that question in a minute. But what compelled you to write this book?
Well, for many years, I didn't feel like my time at 3 separate programs over 288 days really affected me, that I had sort of gotten out scot-free and I was okay to be troubled into my early adulthoods for no reason other than having been troubled in my adolescence. And eventually I started checking Facebook groups in which a lot of the people who attended these programs congregated and talked about their time at the programs and things that happened ever since. And eventually we started to see a lot of obituaries appearing, a lot of cries for help. People were in desperate need of lots of things. People were committing suicide, people were overdosing, and it seemed like a striking difference to what I felt was my own experience at the program. So I decided to revisit and reevaluate my own thinking of my time there, and I learned a lot of disturbing facts about the sort of long-term effects that these programs had on them, and to sort of tie in what you mentioned, even the kidnapping, the transporting that happens in the middle of the night, which is usually someone's initiation into these programs.
Now, obviously, this industry has been adherent and it's been available to parents and juveniles for more than 20 years. But for some reason, it might be due to your book, perhaps due to your book, as well as several books that have been written. We have another author that's on the panel. Maya will be joining us. And obviously, there's a lot of press right now with Paris Hilton, and obviously she's a well-known name. But why do you feel now, after so many years, things are finally starting to come to a head about this, where it's being addressed in every forum practically, and even for Congress as well?
Maya's book, Help at Any Cost, is really the touchstone of the canon for this industry. And she's been such a champion for survivors and people who have come out of these programs for many, many years. And she was actually the first person that I approached. So her work had led to a GAO investigation in 2007, 2008 that revealed many deaths at the programs and many problems within the industries. I think the current media attention is in large part due to Paris Hilton's documentary, This is Paris, in which she chronicles her time at Prober Canyon School in southern Utah, or in Utah, excuse me, and discusses her life thereafter. And it has raised a lot of questions about the industry, but has also brought forth a lot of testimonies from former clients and survivors of these programs. So her documentary was a real shot of adrenaline into the subject. And my book is just sort of carrying the baton forward. And I'm sure the many books that I've heard are in the works thereafter will carry the baton further. We're seeing some movement in states who are seeking to pass legislation that'll curb some of the techniques used at these programs to restrain and sedate children and put them in isolation. So there's a lot of good movement, and I'm always cautiously optimistic, because there have been sort of efforts in the past, like this GAO investigation, that have not led to real reform in the industry. And hopefully, if we can sustain the movement and sustain the momentum that we've carried now, things will start to change, and that people won't be so harmed as they have been in the past.
Well stated. Now the terminology or the word kidnapping is almost like fingernails on a chalkboard for everybody involved, parents, children. But it seems like that term has somewhat become mainstream within this industry for people that have been victimized, in their mind that they've been victimized. And we're not here to doubt that you weren't victimized or people aren't being victimized, but that's a pretty strong term that must essentially have a lot of heartache and a lot of hurt and a lot of pain in the individuals that have gone through these programs, that the word has caught on with almost everyone that's gone through these programs. How did the word kidnapping come about in terms of the association with this industry?
Well, Jim, I'm not really sure how else to describe being taken by two men in the middle of the night without your consent. I don't care what age you are. That's sort of the definition of kidnapping, period. Right. I think the industry has an issue with language. They try to curb things and to couch things in certain ways that make it more palatable to parents. They call it transporting. They call it intervention specialists. Right. They call the wilderness therapy adventure therapy. And it's real misleading to parents. So when they're sold on this idea that these programs are the one thing that can pull their children through, it's a falsehood. And one of those parts of that entire falseness is the fact that these kids need to be taken somehow, that's right, that's okay, that the only intervention is through this means.
So essentially, you went through it. So you're sleeping in the middle of the night as a child or a teen. And how old were you at the time?
I was 16.
You were 16. You're sleeping in the middle of the night, I guess probably 2 a.m. People come into your room and they say, "Come with me." Do you mind, reflecting on that and discussing on how that actually transpired?
It was around 2:15 in the morning, and I woke up to a light on in my room, and 2 men were standing over my bed. Most people that I've interviewed said that they heard some form of, you can either do this the easy way or the hard way. For me, I guess I had picked the hard way because I moved a certain way or struggled a bit, and I had a knee pressed into my back, and I was restrained on my bed, and eventually told to calm down and to take my jeans and t-shirt, put them on, and then follow the men out the door with a finger of one of the men in my waistband to make sure I wasn't going to rush out the door in an opposite direction.
And I guess the scariest thing for you when something like this is happening, and excuse me here, choking me up a little bit, is it your parents are on premises when this is happening, or where are they?
Yeah, ostensibly they're there. My father and mother had divorced 2 years prior, and it was the first night that my father was back in the house, and I remember that very distinctly, just seeing him in the kitchen randomly and thinking, what is he doing here? But I went off to bed anyway. But I heard my mother whisper through the door that to just go with the men. And then I didn't hear from them again for several weeks until we had first contact at my first program.
So that's one of the main concerns that has been very prevalent about the problematic issues in this industry. That number one. Number two is that it's not these retreats, as we call them, the boarding schools, however you want to classify them, aren't regulated enough. And then the other aspect that we hear is the abuse that takes place. And then the final aspect that we hear is that there's not enough communication with your parents or your guardians when you're in these facilities. What can you tell us about those other three factors?
Well, I'd start off by saying that the kidnapping really colors all of the treatment thereafter. It's never broached in treatment. The trauma that derives from an event like that is never addressed in any sort of therapy session, whether private or group, later down the line, and no matter how many programs you go to. These programs, as you know, are called therapeutic boarding schools, but they're in fact residential treatment centers. This is another part of the language and the lingo of the industry that is made to sort of soften the blow of what these places actually are. The abuse in the programs are rampant, and they run the gamut from all sorts of things. Whether, like I said earlier, whether it be undue restraining, tackling, seclusion from one another, silence, you're not allowed to speak to other people, more mundane punishments, very punitive sort of things that you wouldn't expect from a boarding school environment as they're being sold. The industry has said that it would reform and seek to change over many years. I mean, the transporting piece, if we could just recall that again, has been said to be a major issue. Professors who work on this issue and who do the studies and conduct the research for the industry and funded by the industry say that it's a major issue and that it's going to change. Then they issue papers that say, oh, the efficacy rate of these transportations after 3 months don't seem to harm the kids. But this is just not the case. It seems to be affecting everyone in the long run. And then whatever treatment comes later is disparate and not wholly applicable to the teen themselves. It's sort of a broad stroke applied to a very large group.
Understandable. So we're joined by Mr. Ken Rosen, who's the author of the book Troubled, The Failed Promise of America's Behavioral Health Treatment Programs, Behavioral Treatment Programs. It's a nicely written book. And Ken, I would address you and ask you, from doing all these different interviews with some of these different people that could be deemed victims that have gone through these programs, what did you learn from them that you didn't already know from your own being and presence in going through the program?
I learned that a lot of the more subtle treatments, this the sort of recalling your life story over and over again until it fits the narrative that they want you to speak. So you rewrite a story until it fits someone else's view of you. Being told to be quiet and trust the program and go through things that are essentially making you, stripping you of your civil liberties and having you go through therapy that really isn't therapy, shouting matches that are supposed to be a group therapy session, or learning to rat out your fellow students because that'll move you through the program quicker and maybe get you the opportunity to make a phone call home. These little things really added up. And at the time, they didn't seem so bothersome to me. I had come from a military academy. I had already been hazed for many years. It seemed like just the normal track. The crux is that when I ended up going to juvenile delinquent lockup after I left these programs, I was treated better there than I was at these $40,000 a year programs. I ate better, I slept better, I had more freedoms, I was able to write people and talk to people and meet with a therapist if I needed it, when I needed it, not on a schedule. I was surprised to learn that so many people had been complaining about these programs for so long, that young people have been trying to make their voices heard for decades, and still the industry has found a way to shut them out every single time. And it's continuing today. We see with my book coming out, with Paris's documentary coming out, that the industry is gearing up to say, look, we'll just sit tight and let the dust settle, and then we'll go back to the status quo, because they're convinced that what they're doing is right and that they don't need to change anything.
That's understandable. So after writing the book and interviewing the different people that you did and reliving some of the experiences that you had gone through, would you say that obviously you're older, you're more mature, you might look at things through a different prism nowadays as an adult, but was it therapeutic for you to write the book, or did you become more angered from writing the book?
That was very therapeutic for me, but I found that it was therapeutic for the people that I interviewed too, because this was the first time that anyone was giving real credence to their stories. The first time that anyone was actually understanding that what they went through was traumatic, and that they were abused, and that they had a right to be angry. For me is one thing, but the book is really about all the thousands of people who have come out of these programs more worse off than when they went into it. I've grown up and I've understood that my parents felt like they had no other choice, that most parents make this decision against all odds and say they felt that they were at their wits' end. But I feel like they've been given a raw deal. Through no fault of their own have they been coached and directed by an industry that is predatory and aiming to bring people into a for-profit industry, when we know that time and again, community-based outpatient programs, myriad of other types of programs. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I can't say what's most effective and what isn't, but we know that community healthcare is out there, and there are options that aren't going to cost someone $50,000, $60,000 a year and rip a kid from their community.
Right. Well stated. In closing, because we're going to delve into some of these, what would you say are some closing thoughts of what the industry should do to solve these problems?
I think at the federal level, I think the federal level needs to step in and get a ground level of baseline mediation and nonpartisan review boards to check on these programs on a regular basis. I think there needs to be more legislation on the federal level that then allows for more robust state level approaches, though we are seeing more state efforts crop up. I think knowing who's on the panel today, it's going to be a robust discussion. And I know that with this continued momentum and the care of Broward County and places across the country, that we can hopefully work toward a better solution and figure out whether or not we even need this industry at all.
Well, that's great, Ken. Thank you so much for making time from your little bungalow in Italy there. I'm envious of you. I spent a year in Italy when I was in the Air Force. But we look forward to having you on again in the future to discuss this more. And I know that this is going to be a great foundation for the panel. Thank you so much.